Jonathan Foster. This is so cool to see you all the way from Stockholm, Sweden. Technology never ceases to amaze me that we can just connect like this. I, even though I've never seen you in not the flesh, but in this digital flesh, I do feel like I really have a sense of who you are because your essays, of course, they're stunning prose. And they also have a sense of humor and this crazy tension of disillusionment. But I also really hear this longing in you to make make sense of this world's false narrative, and navigate it with as much freaking love that you can muster. And the fact that you can convey all of that in these short essays is pretty profound. So I'm really looking forward to diving in with you today to introduce all of your talent to whoever's listening to us today. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. I think we ought to stop now because you've just opened up with such a lovely introduction. I'm only going to ruin it by actually speaking about it. But yeah, I think you've described really well what I'm trying to do with some of these things. In fact, I had something that came out today, and if it's all right, I'm going to read one comment
Yes.
from one of your previous guests, Eric Allen, who mentioned something. He said, the way you set a scene is immediately immersive. There's this incredible, relatable normalcy that pretends like it isn't teetering right on the edge of a mystical abyss. And I thought, yes, that sounds really good. That sounds right. And I think it's not only a mystical abyss, it's a sort of a political abyss and a philosophical abyss. And I'm trying to write these kind of little snow globes of entertainment that you can relate to as an individual, but also reach out to a greater sort of society and so forth, and ask kind of questions that don't really have answers, but need to be pondered and thought about anyway. That kind of thing.
Yes. And I love how Eric said it, that teetering on that abyss, because I really feel that tension. And I love that you just said that you don't have, that it's not about offering the answers. I mean, as we grow older, we know that the more we know, the less we know. And you present that complexity and that tension, but sort of this also offering of a resolution that is through the heart. It's extraordinary. So I want to jump in because I want to start with, we're going to explore a few of your essays today. And the one that I want to start with is Schrodinger's cat. And because you have such a lovely voice, I wanted to just introduce this with a couple paragraphs from Schrodinger's cat, and then we'll jump in and ask some questions about it.
Okay. Well, Schrodinger's cat's quite an interesting essay for me for lots of other reasons, but we can come to that. But let me just read these 3 paragraphs.
Yeah.
And then I can tell you what I think I mean. Okay. I exited the house like a ninja, creeping past my mother's bedroom, silently squeezing the front door back into its frame, hovering away like a ghost. It felt safer that way, but it isn't actually safer because people without weight eventually just float away. Our town is a harsh place getting harsher, decorated in Union Jack bunting and casual xenophobia. If people aren't careful, this place is heading for trouble. It's already stumbling and snarling like a ravenous drunk, searching for another bottle, strenuously attempting and comically failing to keep up the appearance of sobriety, stability, and civility. It can't last, just like us. Exposed, exhausted, and despised, our town's population comprised of the newly coronated, precarious poor, sinking fast as the shaky ground under our feet is turned to quicksand. Fingers are pointing, tongues are whispering. The country knows who's to blame. Non-enterprise types, like my mother, my brother, my sister, and me. Bloodsuckers, breadliners, the undeserved, the feckless. In this town, I'm not me. In this town, I'm just one of them.
Mm.
So, what is that about? Well, I think I remember in the 80s, because I'm 55 now, so the 80s was a time when I was kind of quite socially and politically aware of a lot
Mm.
of things, even as a sort of younger person. And I remember that, when it says things like our town is a harsh place getting harsher, decorated in Union Jack Bunting and casual xenophobia. I mean, it's quite obvious, really, isn't it? That was the beginning of that kind of nationalism and this
Yeah.
right wing push for deciding who was a valid person and who wasn't. And it was very much a creation of poverty and a creation of a narrative around poor people.
Mm-hmm.
And we were poor people. So I felt that
Mm.
quite strongly. And it was obvious that if they continue, and I say they, I mean, if we as a society continue, and when I say our town, I don't mean necessarily a specific place where I grew up, but the towns that we share, right? Places
Yeah.
that we are all growing up in. If they continue to treat people this way, then people will begin to react in dangerous and negative ways. And today we see that. I mean, there's a new I don't even want to get into this really, but American politics and British politics is not going very well, is it?
No.
And the seeds and the foundations of what we have today, this horror that we have today, were firmly laid and planted back in the 80s. So some of Schrodinger's cat is about the way that society is formed as it goes along, and also the personal and individual relationships that we end up having under that kind of pressure,
Right. Right. And do you feel like when you were young and experiencing that both on the societal level, but also in the home, did you have an understanding of your own agency within that? Or did you feel kind of like you're just being dragged along in it?
Do you mean within the home agency within the family, or at the family agency within society?
Both.
Mm, I think we had very little agency. I mean, that's one of the problems with inequality and poverty, is that you take
Mm.
away people's ability to make decisions and to have opportunities and to feel that they are legitimate actors in the family or in society, right?
You're
And
right.
if you have a society that treats people constantly in that way, you end up with people treating each other that way,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Yeah.
why in Schrodinger's cat, the family are also horrible to each other the whole time,
Yeah.
except the I character and the sister,
Yeah.
which is my way of sort of showing that, in fact, like you said in the introduction, kindness and generosity and love and caring and thought for each other is the only way to really proceed with these things.
Yeah, I guess, and that's kind of what I think I was intuiting, is that within all of this uncertainty, you are finding some of your own personal, maybe not even agency is the right word, but some sort of sense of value or a guiding North Star that was love and kindness. Am I
Yeah,
correct?
I mean, I think so. I mean, but don't you? I mean, I think everybody would agree, right? I mean, isn't that the only
Mhm.
salve? Isn't that the only thing that saves us all from the darkness and
Oh,
the
yeah. I was just learning a little bit. Maybe you've seen this. It's like a 28-minute film from the 50s by Chris Marker, La Jetée. And
no?
it's essentially they're still frames for 28 minutes, and it's a stable time loop. So it's science fiction. He goes back in time, but there's nothing that he can change within that time loop. The whole 28 minutes is just still frames, except for one motion picture, and it lasts for about 3 seconds. And it's the woman that he loved opening her eyes. And in the sense, the filmmaker, we're concluding, is suggesting that love itself escapes that trap of time, and only love. It's just like everything else is static and almost destined
Yeah.
except for
Yeah.
love.
I think it's so hard to discuss these things as well. Like, what do we even mean by love? I know that sounds really, but what is
Hmm.
that? Um, and I know that there was, if we think about, I tend to write about identities as well, and the way we think about ourselves as human beings or as people. And I remember that you made a comment once on something, I don't remember which it was, about how I was panning the camera back
Yes.
from the individual experience to the societal experience. It might have been the Schrodinger's cat or something, I don't know. And I think part of that is to do with also how we are and our identities, right? So I think of identity in terms of I have an individual emotional architecture that's become habitual, and I call that me, right? It's something that I've we all do that. I think that's the internalized identity. And then there's another identity, which is the one that everybody else sees of me. I mean, I find it incredibly difficult to understand who my children actually think I am, you know, or who my wife actually thinks I am, because she sees me and I have this sort of identity that lives inside of their heads only,
Mm.
you know.
Mm.
Um, and so when I think about things like defining love that we were talking about, then it's not necessarily about this internal identity and something that I get my gratification, my personal growth, my love, but the external identity, the one that lives in everyone else's head, right?
Yeah.
That's where love sort of resides in a way,
Yeah.
and tending that one so that you have, instead of ownership of everything, you have sort of guardianship of things.
Mm.
That's the kind of love that I mean when I'm saying that. I have this. I was thinking you might say this. So I got a small piece from a small thing from the shimmering delicacy of all things. So maybe I'll
Yes.
just quickly read this, and you'll see.
Absolutely.
I was talking about, because another thing before I say it is that this frustration that I often show in the writing, and this irritation with the way things are going, is because I think, look, this life is so short.
Mm-hmm.
It's so incredibly short. It's a little zzz, and we're gone.
Mm-hmm.
And what are we doing? So here's the thing. They say the dead beckon to the dying. They say we are enticed toward death by the guiding hand of those we love, those we loved, those we might love again, because the bonds of love, they say, transcend all. I sip my coffee and contemplate the gossamer thin delicacy of life, the transience, the volatility, the seemingly perishable, meaningless nature of all things. And yet here is this love, like an embrace, like a home, like a sky, this underlying elemental essential love that's holding everything together. And so, so
Yeah.
that's what I'm talking about when I say these sort of things about love. It's not really about each of our. I'm very much. I've always been very much pushing against this kind of atomization and individualization of everything. Very much more wishing we lived in a world where there was a mutuality and a mutual dependency
Yeah.
could be returned some way. And I think sorry, I'm
Right.
just going on.
You said you've always been this way. Like, was there a moment, or were there specific events in your life that sort of deepened this conviction for you, or this intention for you?
I think I grew up in I was born in Canada and grew up there a little while. You see some of the murmuration of memories. I think there's a few things about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I grew up in New Zealand as well for many
Hmm.
years, and I spent a lot of time out in nature. And I think that is it's a fantastic way to grow up. It's important, I think, to do that.
Oh yeah.
And so I had a lot of I would say, connection to the world in lots of ways.
Hmm.
And then, very unexpectedly, when I was about 8 or 9, my parents divorced, and we sort of were flung from New Zealand and taken to England, which was quite a shock at the time.
Yeah.
From a blue and beautiful ocean-based lifestyle to this kind of grey urban place where the food was horrendous.
Wow.
Um, sorry.
And
Um,
at 8 years old, you said?
yeah, I think 8, something like
Yeah.
that.
Wow.
And when you have these kinds of and you must know this from your own life, right? From your own experiences with suddenly becoming how do I say this? I don't want to say becoming ill, but becoming
Yeah, well, dizzy. I mean, to be more specific, it's this constant
yeah.
sensation of discomfort in my body. Yeah, but ill, I mean, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, when something happens that where the old world is suddenly the new world,
Yes.
then that sort of philosophical understanding of what the old world was and what the new world should be,
Mm.
and our place in it, and all those kind of things. But also, I think I mean, I've always had a kind of, I don't know, it sounds a bit ridiculous, really, but a poetic kind of outlook.
Well, you do. The poetic outlook is certainly strong, and one of the strengths, you have so many strengths in how you convey this in your writing. And I have noticed, not just in Schrodinger's Cat, but almost all of your essays, you have that zoom lens.
Hmm.
And I want to ask you, how does that moving from personal to universal inform you in your creative process with writing specifically? Is that something that you intend to do every time you put pen to paper?
No, I read something recently. I think maybe it's wrong this, but I think it was Sylvia Plath or something, and she said, "I write to find out what I'm thinking."
Oh, right. Yes.
Uh, and I don't often intend to do any of these things. I just sort of
Mm.
sit down and start writing. I think also that uh, what I was saying about identity earlier, that there's encouragement these days to think of ourselves as sort of units of individual sort of skin, where everything else is outside of us, is actually quite a kind of forced philosophical position. It's not really true, is it? I mean, it's not
Mm.
really the experience that we have. I live as much in the heads of everybody else as they live in my head,
Yeah.
and all those sort of things. So I think also the other thing is that what I'm trying to do in some level is get a reader to feel an understanding or an emotional connection to things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if I write on an individualized level about my own experiences or the fictional characters' experiences,
Mm.
then that's a sort of way in, a bit like Eric said at the beginning, you have normal scenes, which then sort of all of a sudden turn. So you
Mm.
I found that I ended up catching people and then wanting to make bigger points about whatever it is, whatever the topic of the story is.
Yeah, you hook them in,
Mm.
and it may even on first glance, be very different or unrelatable for that person. But then when you move into the universal, all of a sudden these little lights go off as we
Mm.
read you and go, oh, I relate, I connect, I understand. So
Yeah.
it's a brilliant movement that you're doing between the two.
I mean, it's just a counter movement to the nonsense that we have to live in, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, like I think we have so much more into. We have this encouragement all the time nowadays, especially to sort of despise each other or to find differences or to sort of compete with each other and all these kinds of things. But actually, the truth is that we share so much
Mm.
of our experiences and our fears and our unfortunate pasts and the terrible mistakes we made and the terrible mistakes we're going to make and all the rest of it. And so, yeah, I mean, when you think about, I was reading something on Substack. I do love Substack.
I
Some of the
know.
writers on there are amazing. And I was reading something from a nurse who was working in, what do you call it when you go to that last place after hospital before? I can't remember.
Hospice.
Yes, a hospice. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And she was talking about people on their deathbeds. And I was thinking, nobody on their deathbed ever says, boy, I wish I'd been more unkind to people, or boy,
Mm.
I wish I'd bought more junk, and these kinds of things. Um, and
Mm.
so to find ways in the writing that can sort of it's not so much hook people in, but for people to go, yeah, I recognize that, I feel that too, I have that exact same
Yeah.
kind of whatever it might be,
Yeah.
is just a good way to then be able to poetically sort of sneak up and, and say, hey, what about this?
What about
Or
this?
have you want to think
Exactly.
about that thing, or whatever it might be.
Well, and sometimes it's uncomfortable because so I want you to let's have you read something else because I want to give people an example of how In A Perpetual Collapse in Spectacular Silence, you have this extraordinary walk through the deep quiet of the forest. And then you have us speeding through space on a train and reflecting on the, the short-sightedness of our society. And you're just kind of like yanked, your heart's in this place of rest, and then, oh, but this is still happening too. So let's read both, if you can go to those paragraphs.
Yeah, I think I have them here.
Okay, great.
Yeah, okay. On our walks through the deep quiet of the forest, when there's only the sound of the snow or the dry pine needles underfoot, there's peace enough to fall into meditative contemplation, where the past and the future feel like coping mechanisms, evolved to deal with the vast emptiness of time. In these moments, I see that all moments are one and the same, and they describe infinite time as casually as they do our fleeting daily routines. Immense, incomprehensible stretches of time bursting out of a flicker, like a flowing and rolling Mobius strip. And in this peaceful thought, I am struck by our utter infinitesimal insignificance. I mean, some of that is about this thing like the deathbed, how short life is.
Yeah.
What the hell are you doing if you're not? I got just before I read the next one, I got a great comment from Weston Parker, who does the view from a carpenter's point of view.
This is a Substack that I need to know about?
Substack, yeah,
okay,
yeah,
we'll make sure we
and
link that.
he said, "Why don't I just write in caps on all my and all my essays? What the hell is wrong with you people?" Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Oh man, I think Jonathan, we need a list of all your favorite reads on Substack, because I think I'm missing out on some.
There's some fantastic. I have got a list actually.
Great.
Okay. And then later on, we're on the train, right? We are such genius design apes that we are able to conceive of and manufacture incredible wonders like this train. And yet we are such moronically short-sighted and greedy apes that we've abandoned ourselves to these foolish trinkets. Shopkeeper kings have merrily emptied the world of meaning and harvested the majesty of life for their deathly vision. We have failed to fight back as they've suffocated and starved and drowned that which they cannot profit from, whilst fattening and worshipping and endorsing only that which engorges them. The train hurtles through the world that glorifies the trivial and the shallow and dismisses the serious and the essential, and I am blinded by the light we no longer see. I am deafened by the sounds we no longer hear, and I am burning with the love we no longer feel. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that the thing with the shopkeeper kings and the sucking meaning and value out of the world and whatever. I mean, that's a very long-winded and a way to talk about capitalism, really, which is a kind of word that's very dangerous to talk about. I mean, is that we've been so well trained to immediately Pavlovian dog-like say, "Oh, he said capitalism. He must be a maniac or something." But essentially, that's what I'm talking about there, isn't it? I mean, the way that we as individuals have had, or we as a species, can I say, talk about from the individual to the we as a species have had ourselves removed from the capacity to express ourselves in any other way except through these very tiny little value boxes, and it's a tragedy, I think. And you can see that it's a tragedy because the reason I wrote the whatever this one's called
The Perpetual Collapse in Spectacular Silence.
Thank you. Is because of the way we are utterly and completely destroying the environment, and you have to ask yourself, okay, but for what? I mean, for what? What are we doing this for? So that some people can get even more greedy with the inequality and the political instability is so huge now that Egyptian emperors, Egyptian pharaohs would have been embarrassed at the way we behave.
Yeah.
and I want to write about these important and socially important and politically important things, but I don't want to do it in the way that I've read so many things, like in a kind of very dry and very obvious academic-y sort of way. I want to write about it in a way which, as we were talking about before, makes people actually feel in their hearts, what are we doing? Where are we going? How is this going? And I'm always trying to sort of do that. I think that's a great example of that.
Absolutely. And it also, it reminds me of one of the other people I interviewed, Nina Schuler, who wrote a book that essentially had a point of view of the earth. And same as you just said, she was tired of reading about all the environmental degradation from this sort of objective scientific perspective. She wanted to reach into the pathos, and it was such an effective technique. We don't anthropomorphize enough, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, entirely. And also, we were talking earlier about identity. I mean, why not take into account the identity of an ecosystem, or of a Greenland shark, or of whatever it might be? This hierarchy of species importance has brought us to a very, very dangerous place.
Yeah.
Talking of Nina Schuler, is she the one who writes the first sentences, right?
Stunning sentences, yes.
Stunning sentences. When I first found Substack, I think she was one of the first things I actually started to read. And I was so thrilled and pleased with it. And I loved her thing so much. I was always going, oh my God, this is amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Until the end, she was like, calm down. Calm down, Jonathan. All right.
But it is thrilling. And I felt it was really tangible. And I don't know if you listened to the interview I did with her, but she was, even as an 11-year-old girl, was finding sentences that thrilled her and writing them down in notebooks. Like she has this excitement for language that is just so palpable.
That's exactly what I loved about her thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know whether you sort of, when I'm trying to write these things, what I also try to do is sometimes I'll write long sentences with lots of commas, and then sometimes lots of short sentences. And there's a kind of a rhythm and a pace to it. And so her Substack about the actual sort of structure of writing and what's happening in the background, the kind of looking behind the curtain. I absolutely loved it. I haven't really down it.
Well, it's validating. I would think it's validating for you because you do have that rhythm. You absolutely have that rhythm. And it makes me, do you have a musical background or so? Because when I read, it feels like I am, stepping off of land into the ocean and I'm getting ready to be taken away on some other rhythm. And it's beautiful.
I do. I've always played the guitar my whole life. I don't really play the piano, but I've played the flute. I've played lots of different things, and I do have I love music. I'm very musically, or it's always in my life.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean it does, and I think it's really underrated. Is that the right thing to say? In the language of writing, how much rhythm and musicality you can actually get in there. I do a lot of times where I mean, I'm not a poet. I don't know what. I don't like to be all these gatekeepers of what anyone is, but I'm a prose writer, I suppose. But I also insert a lot of rhyming in there, so you find yourself getting caught up in it.
You do.
I hope people find that.
Oh, absolutely. That's part of the hypnosis of it. And I want to say, hypnosis and healing, because you pull us in and then you're offering these suggestions and this balancing of the tension that is quite healing as well. So it's, you said when we started this conversation, you set out to create something that, is entertaining to read, but then presenting deeper ideas. And it's very effective, the technique that you're doing, whether that was, something you considered or it just is how you operate in the world.
I did both. I have considered it and found out that it was sort of how I operated. What I found, I mean, do you want to hear this? Maybe I'll tell you this.
Yeah, of course.
I started, before I started writing The Crow, I was writing something else which was about Arsenal Football Club.
Yes.
I know people know that. My apologies. And it was because I watch a lot of football, soccer, I recognize that if you practice a lot, if you're a sports person, for example, and you go through the motions tons and tons and thousands and hundreds and millions of times, eventually you don't think anymore, right? Eventually your body just takes over, and you get into this kind of flow state where teams and individual players kind of just do things without thinking. And I thought to myself, do you know what? If I could learn how to write, where I could take the consciousness at the fore, the monkey mind consciousness, and push that to one side and just kind of get that flow where I could let things happen. And then I tried to do that a lot at the beginning, and it kind of worked. And I kind of discovered that that I could then come back later and sort of edit the nonsense and find out what it was I'd been saying and where I was going. But yeah.
It's much more of an embodied technique. I would, to me, I relate that to, I was a ballet dancer for 15 years. And for me, I'm not similar to the Sylvia Plath quote you gave earlier. I can't decipher my thoughts. Maybe there's just a lot of noise in there, but once my fingers or my body is moving, those thoughts crystallize and become clearer. And so I feel like for some of us, that transmission of whatever is in here needs to come very much through the body and not just through some sort of analytical process. Does that feel similar to you?
100%. I completely agree. I mean, as I was saying, I grew up in New Zealand. I mean, I was out in the ocean all the time. I was skiing a lot. I was playing tennis. I was playing football. I was always doing something. And I don't, you can have both. You can be a physical and a sort of literal person, and find that those things splash over on each other. And yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah. Okay, I have a question. We're touching on so many interesting topics, and I want to circle back to something about the well, you describe it as the trauma generation machine, and this reflects on capitalism and your question earlier about what is this all for? Why are we making such a mess? Or, is capitalism really a means to an end that is of value to humanity, to the earth, to all the species? And I love how in this essay you wrote, Fire and Smoke, you write, the most dominant and powerful socioeconomic system on earth is a trauma generation machine. I personally want to believe we're morally driven, and sort of feeling into this legacy of trauma helps me tap into compassion for the messiness of it all. But I want you to expand a little bit on this trauma generation machine and what that means to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when I'm talking about things like that, it's lots of different things, right? It's the economy itself. It's creating trauma in the environment. It's creating, I'm actually quite a light-hearted and humorous person in lots of ways. So this does sound a little bit heavy, all this, but I think that I see a lot of sadness everywhere. I see people that are broken. I see people that are, we were talking about identity. I see people that are identifying with kind of, their middle management roles they have in large corporations, sort of almost just removing the chance to be themselves, whatever that means. And I think that I see that all over the place, that kind of thing. And where is it coming from? Well, it's coming from the trauma that is generated by the values of capitalism and the dehumanization of each other and the separation of our collectiveness and our togetherness that is encouraged and happens all the time, right? And when I see that, I find it heartbreaking. I think the thing I wrote something came out today about, I've always had X-ray vision. I can see the ghosts people are always trying to hide, and I can always smile and nod at their hidden sides. I mean, and I think, do you not see that yourself with people wherever you are? And then I think, well, so why do we do it? Why can we not? What are we missing? and goes right back to the beginning when I said I'm not actually going to give you any answers to anything,
Yeah.
but I think one of the problems we have actually um, is that we live in a society that is very mythical about the Messiah, individual people solving problems, or that there are individual single solutions to all these massive problems that we have if we just did this, if we just did that. And I
Mhm.
think it comes from a kind of, religious sort of thing where there's
Yes.
a single God. I don't want to get into um, fetishizing the past or anything like that. But at some point when we started planting agriculture and plants and living in a particularly different way, it enabled humanity to form a much more triangular shape and a steeper shape where
Mhm.
some people are more important than others, and some people have more power than others. And I think eventually all of this kinds of things over thousands of years, right up till now, creates the kind of trauma that we see. We see it
Yeah.
everywhere. What is going on? And it just gets worse and worse. We have, I have two daughters who are 21 or turned 21. The other one's 19,
Mhm.
and the incredible pressures they have on them to live up to a kind of very gender specific idea of what it must be to be a woman.
Yeah.
And of course, to be a woman, you need to be able to buy all these particular kind of products to prove your womanness, and you must be
Mhm.
soft, and you must be kind, and you must be doing all these kinds of things. And
Yeah.
I just think I find it tragic that I find it really hard to be able to intervene as important, because of course I'm their father, it's an important
Yeah.
thing, but the amount of pressure coming from the outside world, this trauma machine that tells
Yeah.
them they're invalid unless they behave in a particular way, they're
Yeah.
dangerous even unless they behave in a particular way. And yeah, so what do we do? What do we do, Kimberly?
What do we do?
What do we do? I mean,
Well,
my answer is to write ridiculous stories on Substack. I don't know if it helps.
I mean, one thing that you are doing, that we are doing on Substack, is we're presenting the questions and we're taking the scarring off. We're
Mm,
opening the wound, because there's something about the word machine that I
mm,
like that you use that, because it implies that it's not human, that it's not sentient.
mm,
And so most of us aren't making these decisions to fall asleep and to,
mm,
take that corporate job and, die slowly inside. We're not consciously doing these. We're just part of the machine. But I feel like something about presenting these questions in the way that you're doing so takes the scar, the
mm,
the real rigid part, and it hurts. I mean,
mm.
when you take it off, it's bleeding.
I think also when you say the machine, it's really a brilliant way to put it, because it means that you're not necessarily going to blame anyone, right? I mean,
Mm,
although I am talking about hierarchy and the kind of wealth class creating these terrible situations, whatever. On the other hand, I also think that they are locked into the machine. They are also in a
yes.
microculture that they can't escape. They also have a set of values that are all about, you know, um, proving certain things or whatever it might be. And
Mm,
so I try to write this stuff so that I'm not pointing the finger at anyone,
mhm.
because we are all. I think, what is it? I said in something. I'm broken by my innocence. I'm broken by my blamelessness, or what, I can't even remember. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's important that the machine means that it's not necessarily somebody's fault, and we really are in an era of
Yeah.
blaming everyone at the moment. It's not very.
You're so right. I love how you put that. We are in this together.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Really.
And we have, if we were all astronauts, we would have come home with the overview effect of
Mm,
recognizing that during the day, in daylight, we don't even see the grids, the electric grids
mm, mm,
from outer space. We just see this ball that
mm,
is so obviously um, part of all of us. There are no
mm.
boundaries.
I think that's actually something that I find a bit annoying in my own writing,
Mm.
uh, is that, and I don't have answers.
Mhm.
But I'm really very good at sort of looking at the situation, seeing the structures, seeing the hidden ghosts, sort of pulling it out, making questions. But I would like if there was more visions of a new world, visions of something else. I mean,
Oh.
it's not really, it's dangerous, really, isn't it? Because
Mm.
anytime you have this kind of vision of something and you try to get there, I can't think of many examples where that's worked very well. Um, but it would be nice. I think it would be nice to have a kind of some kind of. I'm going to try and do that more in the next year. Try and write something that
Yeah.
where there's more hope for change rather than just anger at the way we are.
Are you seeing that maybe potentially as like writing fiction or science fiction, imagining utopias or worlds where there are solutions?
Yeah, not so much science fiction. Although I do love reading science fiction, but no.
Yeah.
And actually, can I answer something slightly different than what you
Yeah,
asked?
yeah, of course.
Because I get a lot as well. People saying, "Is this fiction or did this
Uh-huh.
happen to you?" In fact, I think you
I
mentioned
did. There
something.
was the piece
The
Journey
Geordie
into
thing.
Waters. I thought that was a
Yeah,
piece of
yeah, yeah.
fiction.
You thought what? Sorry.
I thought it was a piece of fiction at first.
Yeah, but it is. It is a piece of fiction.
Oh,
It's the one where the guy goes out in the boat and it sinks and
yes, your friend
yeah,
but it was based on your friend Geordie, correct?
yeah. No, well, no. I mean, I don't have any.
No?
But this is. I think this is a really interesting thing. I
Yeah.
get a lot. Like a lot of these things are purely fictional. Um,
Uh-huh.
uh, and I find that as a way to be able to work out things, and because
Yeah.
Geordie himself is in some ways representative of the seasons of life. Like
Mm.
when I was younger, I was much more probably more likely to get on a boat and go into the sea and do crazy mad things. And then, like seasons change, I've calmed down a lot, and I don't, do that. But Geordie's also representative of capitalism itself, the need
Mm.
to just rip everything apart and
Hunger.
do nothing and do whatever you want. Screw the consequences. Let's just get on with it. That kind of the
Mm.
fire. That's why that thing has the
Yes.
so I write this kind of, and my answer to your question is that fiction, science fiction, what am I going to do in the future? I don't know because some of it seems to be this half fiction.
Yeah.
Some of them are based on things more memoir-iction or something,
Mhm,
you
mhm.
know. But a lot of things I write are purely fiction, but they seem to come across pretty powerfully as me. I think part of that might be because I also write The Dog and I.
Yes,
A lot of
yes.
those are actually me in the forest with the dog, which is also weaved into those things are, some ideas that are not obviously happening.
Well, I love this approach though. And actually Eric and I talked about this too, because, his story, Coincidence Speaks, was essentially his story, but he decided to write it as a fiction with a different character's name,
Yeah.
but he's
Yeah.
essentially it was a memoir.
Mm,
And I think just as we're doing with gender and
mm,
all the other boundaries that seem unnecessary, we're starting to break some of those walls down, and
mm,
my memoir feels much more like narrative nonfiction, or even a mystery than it does just
mm.
presenting a memoir. And I think it's refreshing to not
Yeah,
have to have
completely.
those labels.
I mean, completely. I mean, I wonder as well what is the point of. I get with non-fiction, for example, but even history is fiction to
Yeah.
some degree, right? I mean, it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Written by a certain class of winner who says this is what happened. And then all fiction I ever write is always being drawn from small experiences that I have that I then put into various characters. Is it fiction? Is it non-fiction? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I find it really hard. All of these gatekeepings for
Yeah.
I
So
don't
so
know.
you mentioned that you want to maybe focus on or bring in some elements of hope,
Yeah.
or not necessarily even solutions, but just that sense of optimism, which I sense actually you do. I don't read you and feel like the downer element, because there's, again, as I started, there is this real foundation in compassion and love. So that is a thread that weaves throughout. But I want to explore this with you a little bit more. Like, how do you envision that?
No, I don't. I don't know. I'm really glad that you say that, though. That because I think my things are really hopeful. I think that
Mhm.
they are, but sometimes I think people interpret them as you know more depressed or pessimistic than they are. But yeah, I think Can we swear on this thing?
Of course.
I think we are totally fucked
Yeah.
in so many ways, right? But there's
Hmm.
something also and this is again from the individual to the universal, because although I'm living on a fucked planet and it's going in all the wrong directions and things are collapsing at a rate of unbelievable pain, um, also I have the most extraordinary and magical and wonderful experience in my life,
Yeah.
right? Don't we all? Even the terrible things that have happened, even the impermanence, even I think, in fact, impermanence is a beautiful thing. Thank
Right.
goodness that it exists. If we didn't have winter, what the hell would spring be, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I don't, to answer your question, to like what I'm just talking. I don't. I just would like to be able to think: is there some way to bring more practical hope? But maybe I'm doing it already. I don't know. I don't
Well,
know.
it reminds me of something I read on Substack, and I'm going to find where it was. Oh, it was Ars Poetica. Do you read Ars Poetica?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
So they were exploring
Familiar.
these tensions of opposites, which is always such a powerful, important theme for me. And W.H. Auden wrote a poem, and I don't even know the name of the poem, but it was something about all we need to do is love or die. And then near his death, he changed it because he realized or wasn't the right word, and was the right word. And I like, oh, that is so good, because
Yeah,
that is the key here, is that we can talk
yeah,
about how the world is fucked,
yeah.
and we can feel the love and feel the
Mm,
hope. And I think sometimes we've been so conditioned to think in a binary way. And so people might hone in on the critiques that you're making, and then forget that, oh, but you can have that and this deep, profound passion for life at the same time.
100%. I mean, I love that he changed it to all we need to do is love
Yeah.
and die.
And die.
Because there is no other option, is there? I mean, that's
Hmm.
exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to die. You're going to
Yeah.
die. I think it would be a good idea. In fact, part of the trauma machine is refusing death, right?
Mm.
Is turning our back on it and saying, don't look there. Don't go in that direction. It'll never happen to you.
Yeah.
The billionaire fantasy at the moment, these crazy shopkeeper kings and their spaceship mania, is also to live forever, isn't it? This sort of,
Mm.
what on
Yeah.
earth are you thinking? And when you reach that kind of level of lack of philosophical insight, lack of and die, as Auden said, then you're in a bad and dangerous place, aren't you? And those are the people with the oars at the moment.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. But I
Yeah. They
don't.
don't
Yeah,
want
I
to
don't know
acknowledge
what.
that.
Yeah, I think we need to. There's a lot of certain type of values that we need to really think and consider, and going back to what we were saying at the beginning, not thinking consider it as an identity for my own growth, but as a shared identity, or how is my identity? Who do you think I am? Who do I think?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Well, actually speaking, okay, we keep circling back to identity, and I have in one of the more recent pieces that you've shared, in Murmuration of Memories, you reflect on this evolving relationship with your family and memory. And I love this one line you say: "I saw they were not the telling of me." And I want, can you read that? I think we selected 3 paragraphs in there that
Yeah, yeah,
start,
yeah.
and my
I found
memories.
that.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Uh, and my memories, like the tremors of an earthquake, evoked the time when I could not conceive that the world would ever set out to conquer me. And I remembered love, and I remembered being awash with love, and I remembered being fearless with love, and I remembered being invulnerable. Youth, right?
Mhm.
And it was in the quiet of the world lost in these true memories, when all the stories floated up into the heavens and left me, like a murmuration of starlings rising and rolling in the great dark shadow. No longer in me, but instead I saw them like a near-death experience, and I realized that I had been torn asunder by these fragile and powerful and explosive narratives. But in a moment of quiet, contemplative silence, I could let the stories float away, for I saw they were not the telling of me, and I saw that I could be released. And I remembered in the chorus of beating hearts that even though love is a high-stakes game where you can lose everything, where you can be torn asunder over and over and made raw and left naked and fearful, even though these things are true, we have no choice but to love. Yeah, I mean, some of that one was motivated by the pain of individuals I was talking about before. You see so many times the self-fulfilling prophecies that happen in families,
Yeah.
where you're the bad one, you're the naughty one, you're the funny one, you're the one we have our hopes for. You, not likely, Sonny. And people internalize those sort of stories. And these paragraphs are about the possibility of just saying, well, hold on a minute, these things are not my identity. They're not who I am. They're a kind of murmuration of memories that have been thrown at me, and look at them go away. Who can I be if I'm not, if my family don't decide who I should be, right?
Right. I read that as a real realization, and I don't know if that was more of a fictional or a memoir-ish piece, but I read that as something that you felt released when you finally realized this.
Yeah, I mean, that is quite memoirish, that one.
Mhm.
It was a lot of relief. There was a lot of difficulty in some parts of my upbringing, uh, where I'm considering some of those things in that story.
Yeah.
But also when we were talking earlier about the way that you write, and I said that you get this flow going.
Hmm.
Sometimes I'll write something like that and then come back to it and think, aha, okay, so I mean that, do I? This is what I'm thinking about. Okay, I
Yeah.
get it. And I'm actually almost releasing myself as I go
Yeah.
along, kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's so
Which is a
cool.
process of writing, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's a type of, I mean, you're doing therapy on yourself in a way.
Cheaper that way.
So when you, just curious, when you realized that these narratives were not you, what, let's take it a little deeper. And so what did you discover as the true nature of your identity then?
Well, yeah. But I don't think I don't think that there is a real true nature of anyone's identity. I think there's a sort of, I mean, if you want to get into it, I mean, there's a
Mhm.
sort of an awareness that we all have, and then there's a massive sea of nothingness, and we are an awareness floating about in that in some respects. And so
Mm,
what we do all the time is we create these islands of metaphors and sort of symbolic meaning,
mm,
and internal emotional architecture that we hold on to. This is what the world is. This is who it is. This is who I am, or whatever.
mhm.
And it's a very terrifying and scary thing to say, well, wait a minute. All of that stuff is just a social or a
Constructs.
psychological creation. And what we really are is just awareness and possibly just love, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not a religious person. I live in a world where everybody is kind of, but I don't. I'm not. But if I were to be one, I would probably head towards Buddhism or something, because
Mhm.
that kind of thing feels very normal and natural to my way of thinking.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm right there with you. And for me, the experience, because we can't separate body from identity. And I know from my own journey of living with this neurological disorder and all of that, and the discovery of what I thought was my identity through these paternity revelations, there was this constant stripping
Mm,
away of who I
mm,
thought I was, how I navigated in the world. And I
mm,
found the metaphor, it's just such a perfect metaphor, because what I landed with is a sensation of constant movement, like the ocean,
mm,
which is closer to my truest identity, in the sense that it is just this vast, constantly shifting experience than
Mm, mm.
anything that I could ever define in a solid way. So I have this real visceral experience now of sort of what all that shedding of identity led me to. Um,
But
so
that's
anyway,
brilliant.
yeah,
I feel the same way. I completely agree. I think fluidity, flux, change. What is Heraclitus said? You put your foot in the river, and the river's not the same, and the man's not the same. I mean, that's exactly how it is for identity too, right?
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
always trying to write these sort of vocabulary of images sometimes in the Crow. And one
Hmm.
of the things I've used over and over is this idea that we're sitting by the firelight, and out just beyond where the light is darkness, where fear is, right? And so much of what we do to create identity is to try and manage perceived oncoming dangers and fears that aren't even there. They're
Right.
only really in the head, aren't they? So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I
Beautiful.
100% agree with you. I like that's a really nice way of putting it.
Well, Jonathan, I have to ask one question, and I know he's not here with us, but I'm
Sorry.
realizing that we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to mention the dog, because
Yeah,
we
yeah, the
all
dog.
worship at the Church of Dog.
Yeah, good. Okay, I am religious. So it's the dog.
Yeah, we are, exactly. I will worship to the Church of Dog. Um, and what's his name, by the way? Do you never
Yeah,
share his
I know.
name?
I know. There's a fantastic reader. You probably know Law, right?
Yeah,
LOR.
yeah, yeah.
And I
Yes,
think
I
she's
love
the only
Laura.
one who actually knows the actual name of the dog. And his name is Benny.
Oh, of
Benny.
course, Laura knows. Of
Yeah,
course.
yeah, 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 yeah. And her dog's called Ranger. We swap dog names, you know.
Oh, that's so cute. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
Benny. His name is. He's a Kleiner Münsterlander, which is a small. What is it? A small Münsterlander. It's a German bird dog.
mm,
And he's a fantastic personality, really interesting. I mean, yeah, if you want a guru, come and meet Benny. He's a dude.
oh, yes, I do. And I want to know if he has anything to share. What does he want everyone to know about
Yeah,
existence or dog food?
yeah. I think the thing with him is that he has an appreciation. It's really dodgy saying live in the now. It's a very peculiar thing, and it doesn't really whatever that means. But he kind of does live in a sort of joyous now all the time. He never holds
Mm.
grudges. He never. He's just so yeah. He's just so happy. So I mean, his
Yeah.
advice would be just relax, relax, dude.
Yeah. Yeah, he's like the perfect foil to humanity's chaos and,
Oh,
everything we
actually,
get
talking.
ourselves.
I know we've got 1 minute left, but talking of the future writing, I really liked that one in Fire and Smoke or whatever, where the dog started. He's begun talking. I've noticed in these
Yes,
things,
yes,
and he's so much wiser than I am. And he's that could be a thing actually. The dog speaking more in the future.
absolutely, because he does have the answers.
Yeah, he does.
But didn't he say, I have it right here. He says, but what happens when you can't change society and there's nowhere else to go? What happens when the uncharted places have all been charted? What then? He's asking you this, but
Yeah,
then he
exactly.
does kind of give you an answer.
He's smart, but that's because the dog's read David Graeber, and so I think yeah. I'm going to try more of that.
Yeah. Oh, sweet Benny.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, Jonathan, this has just been such a delightful conversation. You are such a philosopher and a poet, and a humorist. I mean, I do feel the lightheartedness too, and
yeah.
that's
Good.
really, um, yeah. You're a complex human being, and I love that all of those pieces are part of what make you you.
Yeah, man. Well, Kimberly, we all are. You are too. Well, I'm going to thank you so very, very much for this. It's been an absolute honour
Yeah.
to talk to you, and I really, really appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Ah, wonderful.